inflation. It's quite obvious that fiat currencies are a lousy store of value. The US dollar just happens to be the best of the fiat currencies, but they're all junk and they are programmed to self-destruct.
Please join us for our next live stream, Sunday, November 6th at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll go over current events, past guests, and of course, gold and silver news. Once again, our next live stream will be Sunday, November 6th, 9 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. Nick Giambruno joins us today. Nick is the founder of the Financial Underground, an independent research provider. And Nick and the Financial Underground's mission is to uncover the truth about money and markets that you're not supposed to know, not supposed to see. His research puts together the pieces to reveal the true big picture and how to get positioned in unstoppable investment trends ahead of the crowd with smart speculations. And we're delighted to have Nick join us once again today. It's time to saddle up and silver up for Nick Giambruno. Nick, welcome back to SBTV. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great, Patrick. Good to be with you.
Glad to have you back on. You know, Nick, I was reading an article on your website, thefinancialunderground.com, and that article was titled Marx's Fifth Plank, What You Need to Do as the Fed's Credibility Evaporates. And probably the one point the Fed made that really was a swing for the fences and a big whiff was when the Fed said inflation is actually a good thing. Nick, under what logic is inflation a good thing?
Well, for most decent human beings, it's not a good thing. Inflation is theft by fraudulent means and stealing from savers surreptitiously. So inflation is never good. It's not good for the economy. It's not good for the individual. So anybody saying that inflation is good is just a flat-out liar or a fool or somebody who benefits from this insidious system. So what the Fed, but who does benefit? There are beneficiaries from inflation because what happens? The value from that is lost from inflation, it's not as if it just evaporates and goes up into the atmosphere. It's a wealth transfer. It goes from some people to other people. So who is it a wealth transfer to? Debtors, people who have debt. Those are the people who love inflation because they get to borrow in dollars and pay back in dimes. So debtors love inflation. And who is the biggest debtor in the history of mankind? It's the U.S. government with about $31 trillion worth of debt. And to just put it into perspective, a trillion, they throw these numbers out, it might as well say a gajillion, but you have to conceptualize these numbers. And I think we've talked about this before, but a trillion is an insanely large number. If you earned $1 per second, it would take you about 32,000 years to make $1 trillion. So that's how big a trillion is. It's an incredibly big number. So yes, they have all this debt. 32 trillion and counting, and that's not counting the other unfunded liabilities. So of course they love inflation. It makes that debt less daunting. So who benefits from inflation? To the people closest to the money printing and people who have a lot of debt. So yes, of course, and the Fed is just the mouthpiece for the government in this case. Of course they're going to say inflation is a good thing. That is their product. That is their product. It's what they produce. If they were a company, that's the product they would make is inflation and wealth redistribution. So of course they're going to say it's good.
Yeah, you know, I could talk about inflation all day here, but another word used in that same article was the word gaslighting. Gaslighting can be defined as a form of manipulation that often occurs in abusive relationships. It's a covert type of emotional abuse in which the bully or abuser misleads the target, creating a false narrative and making them question their judgments and reality. Nick, are the Fed and the people who use the Fed's money in an abusive relationship?
Oh, certainly, certainly. Here's an easy way to think of gaslighting. Imagine somebody comes up, the government, some government employee spits in your face and then tells you, oh, it's actually raining outside. It's not, I didn't spit in your face, it's raining. This is what gaslighting is they're trying to get you to, and this is, inflation is good. That is also gaslighting. So this is horrible stuff, horrible stuff. And the thing is that most people don't wouldn't think inflation is good. We don't think rising medical costs, rising food costs, rising housing costs, rising everything, energy costs. Who thinks this is good? Like, what average person thinks this is good? So this is why they have to engage in the gaslighting, because it's not good for the average person. It's good for the elites. It's good for the indebted governments. So instead of telling you, "Oh, hey, this is poison for you guys," no, it's actually good for you. Have a second helping of this poison. So this is what they're doing. It's propaganda. It's psychological warfare. Frankly, it's psychological warfare that the elites and the central bankers are engaging upon the rest of us peons. So this is what they're doing, and I urge people not to. And in the mainstream media is part of their this cartel of criminals, and they're all you'll look at Bloomberg, CNBC. Every time look at these clowns on the mainstream financial media, they're out there bending over backwards to try to tell you that inflation is good. I mean, they might as well tell you, like, hey, it's good for you to have a tapeworm infection. You know what? Cancer is actually a good thing because maybe it stimulates the economy. This is the kind of ridiculous and logic that these people are using. So these people, you'll see them on CNBC, you'll see them in the Wall Street Journal, you'll see them in Bloomberg. These people are just propagandists for this central banking system whose only product is inflation and poverty.
Nick, do you get the feeling that this propaganda is only going to get worse?
Oh, absolutely. Because as the inflation gets worse, people are feeling the pain, and they want to. They're looking for somebody to blame, and most people, sadly, aren't financially literate and don't understand where this is coming from. So, yes, the propaganda is going to get worse because the people who cause these problems, the central bankers, the politicians, the mainstream media who supported them, they don't want the average person to be like, "Hey, you are actually the cause of all of these problems and all of this destruction, this economic and wealth destruction." They don't want the average person to point the finger at the Fed, the Federal Reserve, or the central banks, or all the other institutions that enabled it. So, yes, the psychological warfare is going to get ramped up. They're going to tell you, oh, it's because of the greedy oil producers or the greedy capitalists or some kind of bull crap like this. Instead of where the actual problem is, the people who are debasing and destroying the currency. That's where the blame lies, but they're going to try to deflect the blame. And since they control the media, they're going to possibly be very effective at it. So we'll see what happens.
I suppose at some point, sadly, we will take a look at the mirror one day and really start to see that yes, we are being misled by governments and politicians. But Nick, why this coercion by governments?
Well, you mentioned coercion. That is the essence of government because government is a coercive institution. It wouldn't exist without coercion. There's no such thing as a voluntary government. It's a contradiction in terms because government exists by coercion. How else? That is what they do. They are allowed to initiate violence and force against people, peaceful people. That's their nature. No other entity has a legal monopoly on the initial initiation of force in that sense. That's what makes governments unique. It's all a government is think of it like a large gang that has a legal monopoly on violence in a geographic area. That's what a government is. I mean, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Europe, that's all a government is. So yes, that is the very essence of government is coercion.
With so many things going on, a lot of people are seeing the very real possibility of a financial reset coming on down the road. Is the US dollar, perhaps every fiat currency, in sort of a self destruct mode?
Oh, certainly. For the reasons we were talking about earlier, yes, they are programmed to self-destruct because of all of the inflation, the money printing, which is primarily being used to finance government spending. So it is a certainty that these things are going to lose value, and over the long term, this is not a revelation. It's quite obvious that fiat currencies are a lousy store of value. The U.S. dollar just happens to be the best of the fiat currencies, but they're all junk. They're all junk. And frankly, this is where these people get their power. Think about it. They create fake money out of thin air and get the whole world to run on a hamster wheel to chase these little scripts of paper confetti and digital confetti. This is where these people get their power. So it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. Just look behind the curtain and see that these people, they shouldn't have that much power. They're just a bunch of fraudsters creating fake money and getting us to chase after it. We should be going after real money. But yes, that is the nature of fiat money. They're going to create more of it. It's going to get debased, and it's going to be sad for most people who hold this garbage, frankly. And so, yes, I would expect to see much more, especially in the months ahead, much more currency debasement. I think that is the theme of the decade. The theme of the decade is currency debasement, and that's what we're going to see a lot more of that.
If you're enjoying this interview with Nick Giambruno and I, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and let the algos know you'd like to see more content like this. And if you'd like to learn more about systemic wealth protection, please do visit us at www.silverbullion.com.sg. You think the currency debasement is going to be Paul pivoting, going back to QE? I mean, how far do you think he can actually raise the interest rates?
Not much farther, because there will come a point where the amount of interest, because it's different in the past. Paul Volcker, the former head of the Fed, he could raise interest rates in the past when inflation got out of control. Why? Because the debt was low. So the interest rate from the debt, from the higher interest rates, they could afford it. This time they can't. If they raise, look at the CPI, which you and I both know is a load of crap. It's a fake inflation number. But let's just, for argument's sake, say that's correct. It's about 8-9%. If they have to raise interest rates to 8 or 9%, the interest expense on the debt, because the debt is so much bigger now, would be more than Social Security. It'd be more than the Department of Defense. It'd be the biggest expense of the U.S. government. So it would basically bankrupt the U.S. government if they needed to raise interest rates to the level to counteract inflation. That's what makes it different this time. So since they can't do that, they're engaging in this kind of charade, this pantomime. So I don't think it's going to go much higher. They have no choice but to go back to the money printing. So what does that mean? If they don't have any choice, it means the inflation is going to rage out of control. We're in this phase right now where they are doing this charade where they're talking tough, but they can't really raise interest rates to the point of combating inflation. Anybody who it's not even that hard of math. It's like fifth grade math. You can see that they can't do it. So they're engaging in again, the Fed is all about psychological manipulation and psychological warfare. They're convincing people that they're going to be tough on inflation, and they have raised interest rates from 0 to basically 4% or so. And yeah, that's not nothing, but that's not enough. It's not even close to enough. So they cannot get it to where it needs to go, and they're just trying to shape people's perceptions, because if they do, they're going to cause the bankruptcy, not just of the U.S. government. They will definitely cause the bankruptcy of the U.S. If the U.S. government goes bankrupt, everybody's going bankrupt. Corporations are going bankrupt. Individuals are going bankrupt. So they're not going to self-destruct. They'll self-destruct if they go there. So what they're doing is they're engaging in this whole charade. How much longer it will go on, I don't know. My best guess would be 6 to 12 months maximum. I mean, if they get right up to the line of that debt spiral, maybe they have 12 months at the most, and at that point they will go over the edge. That's the line. I don't think they're going to go all the way up to the line, so I would say around 6 months, maybe at most. So we'll see. Nobody knows. However, I'm very confident of the long-term big picture. I'm not day trading or making investment decisions based on what I think the Fed is going to do day to day. I'm basing my investment decisions on the long-term big picture trend, and I'm very confident of that. So I don't, all of these hiccups in the short term, I know the Fed is going to eventually have to capitulate. There's no way they can raise interest rates higher than inflation. So what's happening in the short term, honestly, to me, is just noise.
With that word bankrupt in mind, do you think some sort of a debt jubilee is in the cards to act as a sort of release valve? And if so, how would this work?
It works by inflation, because debt, how are they going to extinguish that debt? Uh, Currency debasement, more currency creation. So we already have seen this. The debt jubilees are also nothing new. Debt jubilees go back to ancient Babylon, thousands of years ago. They're an old technique. What the rulers of the ancient Babylon and the ancient world realized is that when the peasants, the peons, us basically, they get into too much debt, they tend to revolt. And what they realized is that, well, rather than having a peasant revolt where the whole system could be overturned, why don't we extinguish some of these debts and let people move on with their life and not threaten the entire ruling system. That was the idea behind it back in ancient Babylon, and it's kind of been codified. It's codified in the Bible too. I mean, you see these things, talk about debt jubilees and so forth in the Bible. But the concept, I mean, the concept is that when the debt reaches a saturation point, that something has to happen. And I think what is going to happen in this case, the flavor of the debt jubilees that are coming, that have already started. First of all, remember when there was this COVID hysteria, they gave everybody these PPP loans that were forgiven. That's a debt jubilee. Everybody's debt was basically forgiven there. That was a giant boondoggle. What did that cause? It caused inflation, because how did they finance it? Money printing. Now, then a few recently, they had the Biden's student loan debt jubilee. How are they going to finance that? Money printing, currency debasement. So I think this is the pattern. This is what's going to happen if there are future debt jubilees, and I think there will be, because the debt has to be dealt with some way. It's going to be dealt with inflation. So it goes back to currency debasement, which I think is the theme of the theme of the decade. So that's what you want to base your investment allocations around that big picture theme. I think that's what you want to do.
Speaking of release valves, Biden is looking to extend the flow of oil coming from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Now, with that, Saudi Arabia's energy chief, Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman, said this: losing emergency stocks may be painful in the months to come. What do you think he meant by the word painful? And this was spurred on because with Biden looking to release more oil from that strategic reserve, it means he essentially is trying to push the oil price down, and Saudi is not too happy about that.
Because they have to refill the strategic petroleum reserve. They're frittering through this. This is supposed to be something. I don't think the U. I mean, I'm of the opinion the U.S. government shouldn't manage this stuff. This is not a government's job, but nonetheless, it is there, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And the point of it is supposed to be in an emergency, in like a natural disaster, an economic depression. It is not supposed to be drained so that they can make gas prices go down before an election, which is what they're doing. So they're frittering away the nation's strategic assets. So that strategic petroleum reserve is going to have to be refilled at some point, and refilled. And what's that going to do to oil prices? If they have to refill the strategic petroleum reserve, that's going to make oil prices go up over the medium term. So that's what he's referring to as pain. Pain in the form of higher oil prices, because they are consuming this now, and they're going to have to pay for it later. And that is going to exacerbate the situation with rising prices, inflation, and currency debasement. So it all comes back to that. It all comes back to currency debasement, which is sadly going to hurt lots of people.
I mean, I could be wrong for saying this, but with what's going on right now, it reminds me of the whole bread and circuses, Roman times, the entertainment to keep people's minds off of what's going on and keep it away from what's going on, and giving people grains, keeping them happy, and again appeasing people to keep their politicians in power. And with what we're seeing, it sort of reminds me of this right now. And with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, there's about 400 million barrels, I believe, in there left currently. And the US uses 20 million barrels per day. So if something should really go wrong and there's no oil coming in to refill these strategic supplies, we could really be in a world of trouble just because politicians want to get reelected.
Oh, certainly. It's politicized too, because they're doing it right before an election. They're trying to make gas prices go down by draining the Strategic Petroleum Reserve ahead of an election. Frankly, that's criminal mismanagement of a nation's asset, and the politicization of it. So yes, it is a form of bread and circuses, because it's a form of welfare in a sense, because they're making oil prices artificially low by draining the reserves. So yes, it's horrible. And when the oil prices inevitably go higher, talk about gaslighting. They're going to blame. Who are they going to blame when this? Who do you think they're going to blame? Oh, they're going to blame those Arabs or the Russians or the oil producers, those greedy oil producers. They're not going to blame the politicians that drain the strategic oil reserve, which they should. So talk about gaslighting. You're going to see a lot of that coming when the pain of this starts to be felt. I guarantee it.
Another leader warning about pain is Putin, where he said the process of de dollarization of the global economy is inevitable. Is it inevitable to a point where major countries and economies will not want to use the dollar? And if so, what will they use?
Yes, I think it is inevitable because the U.S. has abused its privileged position of being in charge of the world's reserve currency. You know, we could talk for hours about this. They are printing it. They are printing by the trillions. They are sanctioning anybody they don't like and basically saying, "Oh, we don't like your politics, so guess what? You're cut off from the dollar." Well, that doesn't really, yeah, you can use that. You can use that financial weapon of sanctions a couple of times, but eventually it's going to lose its kick. It's going to lose its potency because people are going to be like, "Wait a minute, there's way more political risk in this thing than I want to hold." And they're going to go to alternatives. Nobody knows what the alternatives are going to look like, but I would imagine they would be rooted in gold, possibly, and possibly energy. So we'll see. Nobody knows what it's going to look like, but I think that's what it's going because okay, so they're going away from the dollar. Are people going to trust somebody else's fiat currency? Are you going to trust the Chinese fiat currency, the Russian fiat currency? These are again, fiat currencies are just pieces of paper and digital accounting things that people create with no effort. Are you know, so the same problem could happen with another fiat currency, the problem of debasement and political risk. So I think people are going to go back to something that is apolitical, non-political, that has value recognized around the world, and could be a number of things.
Okay, so far we kind of set the stage with fiat troubles, inflation, rising interest rates, and so forth. Where do you see gold and silver going? Because so far it hasn't really done all that much.
Yes, that's right. It hasn't. And but I think they are among the most competent, the best monetary alternatives because we got to take a step back. I think the biggest distortion in all of the financial markets right now is that most of mankind doesn't even know what money is. Like, what if you ask somebody what money is? Just ask some guy on the street, you're going to get a very weird answer. Oh, it's the piece of paper in my wallet. But no, like, what is it? Like, what does it do? Like, it's, I'm not talking about like a dollar bill or a peso or a ruble. I'm talking about what is money? Like, what is it? What is the function of it? Like, you know what a shoe is? You put your shoe on when you want to go walk outside. It protects your feet. But what does money do? Most people will not be able to answer that question, but it's very simple. It's to store value and to exchange value. That's it. That's all money is. It's nothing complicated. These gatekeepers in the media, they try to make it with all these charts and these jargon. They try to confuse people. But at the end of the day, all money is something that you use to store and exchange value. So, what is something that is useful for storing and exchanging value? Well, historically, the best it has been gold and silver because people haven't been able to arbitrary. It hasn't been out of all the commodities and all the things people use as money. They're the hardest things to produce. They're the hardest, the most resistant to inflation, and the most resistant to political manipulation. I personally like gold. I think gold is, you know, out of the physical commodities, gold is fantastic for that role. Silver is number two in the monetary role. So I think definitely the alternative monies. And I would, you know, people may disagree, but I would put Bitcoin in there too. None of the other cryptos; those are all junk because people can control them. But the one that nobody controls is Bitcoin. So I'd put Bitcoin, gold, and silver in as the alternative monies, the alternative vehicles for storing and exchanging value. That will see a big boost once as these fiat currencies are debased. So I view these as absolutely essential because money is an essential function. Money is essential for humans. You know, otherwise we're going back to barter. If you don't have money, you go back to barter. You want to buy a steak at the store? Well, maybe the butcher he wants a barrel of apples, or you know, how do you know you don't want to go back to barter. Barter is inefficient, so you got to go to something that is neutral that everybody wants and that is hard to produce. So I think those three things, gold, silver, and Bitcoin, are going to be essential in the months and years to come.
Okay, so do you think these three, gold, silver, Bitcoin, they will actually go into that monetary fold where we will recognize them as money.
Yes, I think that is the case. We will see what happens. I think it for the big countries, it's going to take a meltdown in the fiat system, which we're well underway already. So if we see other countries like Russia, so if Russia and China are going to start to use money outside of the dollar, they're probably going to have a link to gold. I would imagine they both have large stashes of gold. And that is a form of money that is, non-political. So I think it's going to take that for gold. We'll see. I mean, Bitcoin is already used as money in El Salvador. It's probably going to be picked up by a couple of other countries as legal currency in the not so distant future. So I guess the answer is nobody knows. But what we know is that these are alternative forms of money, and they're superior to fiat money. Now, whether there's which one is superior among themselves, among gold, Bitcoin, and silver, we can talk about that another time. But the main theme here is the currency debasement of fiat currency. That's the main issue here, and we want to look at how we can address that. And that is the way I see it. So nobody knows exactly how it's going to shake out, but I think if you are positioned in gold, silver, and Bitcoin, you will do well during this chaotic monetary period.
I just want to get your opinion on this, Nick, where we had news from Egypt where the Egyptian central bank they plan to establish a new index of gold and foreign currencies aside from the US dollar. So I wanted to get your opinion on this where is this another country looking to de-dollarize?
Yes, it's a straw in the wind. It's another indication of this trend we were talking about de-dollarization and the remonetization of gold and other things. I think the Egyptians are very aware because who guarantees the security of Egypt? It's the U.S. government. So they're not going to push it too far, but they are, edging in that direction. But as long as, that's a whole nother ball of wax is the geopolitics of the Middle East. And it as such, the Egyptians are wholly dependent on the United States. So they're not going to push it too far because they don't want to upset their patron. But yes, it's an important milestone and straw in the wind of this trend. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this to come. And speaking of which, the big enchilada of global trade is the energy market. So if you want to see where this de-dollarization is going to happen, it's in the energy markets. And Russia is one of the largest energy producers. And earlier this year, they said because of the sanctions that have cut them off from much of the global banking system, they'd be happy to take gold and Bitcoin in payment for their energy. So if that actually becomes a reality, that is when you're going to see the rubber hit the road is in the energy markets. So I would be watching that very closely. Right now, the dollar is still dominant, but I think those days are rapidly coming to an end.
Yeah, gold, silver, Bitcoin. Nick, you are in Argentina. Could you give us a little bit of insight as to what's going on in Argentina as far as inflation? We're talking about gold, silver, Bitcoin. Are people actually moving into these things, using these things? What are people in Argentina doing?
Sure. Well, I spend a lot of time in South America, in various countries, and I'm in Argentina at the moment. And the country has a notoriously a high inflation rate. So what they're dealing with here is that yes, there is a more adoption to Bitcoin relatively. However, most people here still go to the dollar, so they're still going to fiat currencies, unfortunately. However, I think they are. They're used to monetary chaos. So I'm not saying it's not painful, but let's say there is a problem with the dollar. I think instead of Argentines going to the dollar, they could just as easily go to something else, gold, silver, or Bitcoin, because they're already oriented to looking at alternative forms of money. So they would just switch out the dollar for something else. I think it would be a very smooth transition. Not to say it wouldn't be painful, it would, but other countries, I mean, they're going to be in big trouble. Like, what are a lot of Americans? They're going to be in. I mean, they're killing each other. They'll kill each other over a roll of toilet paper in a serious crisis. So, and they also aren't aware of this stuff because they've been spoiled by having the dollar, which is the world's reserve currency, for so long. So I think the people who are are in situations that have the worst kind of fiat money right now are going to be most receptive to the alternatives when it comes. And the people who are most close to the fiat system, Europe, the US, the average people in these countries are going to have the hardest time making that transition. So, ironically, it could be the countries that are the most messed up right now with the highest levels of inflation. You see the same kind of thing in Lebanon, Venezuela, and other countries. I think these are the countries that are actually going to be better suited to transition to alternative and superior forms of money, which would be an ironic twist of history. So we'll have to see how that turns out.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because people in Argentina or other countries that use the US dollar, should something go wrong, or I mean, they have the flexibility to move between currencies. Whereas, let's say people in the US, should something go wrong with the US dollar, where do people in the US go to?
Oh, exactly. So that is exactly the point, is that they have this culture, this history of going back and forth between different currencies that Americans they frankly don't have, and it would be very alien to them. I'm an American. I mean, I know how it works over there. So yeah, that's why I think those countries who are the most distressed right now have the are going to be the easiest to bridge this gap to better forms of money.
All right, Nick Giambruno, before we wrap up, can you let the viewers know how they can follow you and more of your views and insights?
Sure. You can follow me at Twitter at Nick Giambruno, and also at my website, financialunderground.com, where I publish my thoughts on these topics. And also, there is a guide that your viewers and listeners might be interested in. It's called How to Survive and Thrive the Worst Financial Crisis in 100 Years. It's a very helpful report I put out on my website, and I think there will be a link to it in the description below that the viewers can check out. And I think they'll find a lot of useful information there.
Right. We'll make sure to put a link there for that guide. Nick, we appreciate the time you've given. I hope we can do this again soon, and let's see how things unfold.
Sounds great, Patrick. I'd be happy to.
That was Nick Giambruno from the financialunderground.com sharing his views on geopolitics, the economy, and gold and silver. To see more of Nick's work, please do visit thefinancialunderground.com. If you like this video, please subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and share it with your friends to let the algos know you'd like to see more content like this. Audio-only versions of this interview can be found on iTunes and Spotify.